Thank you, Jumana.
Happy to take questions.
Yes, I'm very happy that we did this in 1 hour, so we have 30 minutes for Q&A. And you see how, being disciplined gives us more time for Q&A. We have heard 5 excellent speeches and presentations about Tunisia. So now we can take your questions. Please make them short and to the point. We don't want speeches, we want questions. Dexter.
Got it. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for packing tons of information.
Microphone, please.
Thank you for packing a lot into very short presentations. So several of you talked about a comparative perspective for the decline of Tunisian democracy, and the 2 speakers who talked about political parties also sort of focused on the decline of this political party system. But I'm wondering, from a comparative perspective, from like Latin American experiences of sort of constitutional authoritarianism or coups, are there examples that we can look to for like hope? Are there places where, there's this crisis? Mr. Hernandez talked about the like crisis in faith in the system that sort of leads people to accept this authoritarian figure in several examples, right? How do you reestablish, not confidence in a previous system that didn't work, but confidence in some sort of alternative? And then, how do you rebuild a political party system that's just been like completely destroyed and discredited? Like, there have to be other examples of places, like, I don't know, I mean, in Peru in the 90s, like, the party system seemed to be pretty weakened. Like, that's my question. Where can we look for examples of like hope and like things to follow in this?
Anybody wants to answer this question?
Okay. How much time do you have?
2 minutes.
Okay, so I can do that in 2 minutes. An African case, we can look at Ghana, which has repeated political crises and resolves them within the institutions. And I think there's a lot of interesting lessons for why Ghana is a poor country. Ghana has an authoritarian history, at times nasty. It's a lot of the arguments for like, that's a rich, wealthy country in a nice neighborhood with no violence don't apply. That's an excellent case to look at. Then the second piece is, if you want a Latin American case, actually look at Peru and why the Castillo autogolpe didn't work. That's the second case. But then what about when it all goes wrong? I'll just keep talking about Latin America, right? Let's think about Chile under Pinochet, right? So the party structures are consolidated and destroyed. Chile has to rebuild democracy, but not just rebuild democracy, but rebuild a way of doing democratic politics. And that's after, God willing, we have democracy in Tunisia. That's the task, right? Is how do we get back to resolving our problems within democratic norms? And I think that requires commitment of all the major actors to accept democracy even when it's not in their interest. And that's, I think, the common theme you get in cases where democracy keeps going when it could have not, is commitments of people where democracy isn't in their interest tomorrow necessarily. They could have gotten more of what they want by authoritarianism to insist on democracy anyways at the start, and then later the habituation of that. 2 minutes?
Good.
All right.
And if I might add something to that, you want? Yeah, sure.
There's an excellent book called
Here's the mic. Here's the mic.
Democracy in Hard Places by Tariq Massoud and Scott Greenwood. It's called Democracy in Hard Places. They cover specific case studies that answer your question.
Also, very quickly, Dexter, I think the good news coming out of Tunisia is people are now realizing that dictatorship is not the solution. Democracy did not deliver everything that Tunisians wanted or had hoped for, but dictatorship, they've tried it now for almost 5 years, at least 4 years, and the results are catastrophic for everything. So I think Tunisians are starting to realize, hey, democracy wasn't so bad after all compared to, dictatorship. Please.
Hi again. So this is for Jumana. And I know, Marwan, you answered part of my question a little bit, but I'm actually really interested in the status of the constitution that was drafted or that was implemented by Iyad bin Ashur. And then Casey came in, and what were the changes? Where is it now? And what is the Tunisian sentiment on this new revamped constitution? And then I just wanted to say in regards to Ghana, that's also slipping because they are, drafting or if not have passed an anti-LGBT legislation. Just saying.
Thank you for your question. Oh, is this working? Yes. The Constitution gave more equality between men and women, more role in politics, and also protection against domestic violence that was implemented later, 2016-17. However, full equality has yet to be implemented, like the inheritance issue. I hope this answers your question.
And I'm not aware of any constitution that was written by Iyad bin Ashur. Are you referring to the 2014 constitution? Okay. It wasn't written by Iyad bin Ashur. It was written by the Constituent Assembly over 2 years of negotiations. But that was very democratic and very progressive constitution. Yes, please.
Can you hear?
No. Can you turn it on? Let's give him another mic. We have other mics.
Mohammed Abbasi from Rutgers University. This question is about Tunisia, but it's also about Egypt and about other countries. Has any of you, in your research, uncovered evidence of manipulation either by superpowers like the United States or maybe regional powers into the local politics? I mean, I haven't heard any reference of that. Even though it's in popular media, there's always indication that there's other actors, outside actors, that are messing around with the local politics. Is there any evidence of that, or is this covered really well that nobody's seeing it?
Anybody wants to answer that question?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I don't find evidence that there was actually foreign interference in the case of Tunisia in particular. I mean, when the Arab Spring happened and people were talking about the reversals that took place in the so-called post-Arab Spring countries, and Tunisia, as I mentioned in my presentation, emerged as the sole survivor of the tumultuous waves of the Arab Spring, a number of reasons were mentioned as to why this is the case. People said it's a smaller country, has a smaller population, has better laws in place, better legislation, has more protections against dictatorship. Obviously, we have to talk more about that after what happened in 2021. There was also talk about women's empowerment in Tunisia, how they are at the bench, and I mean that there are actually female judges in Tunisia. The fact that there's high literacy rate in the country has one of the highest literacy and education rates, and also the fact that it did not have too many cooks in the kitchen. As you know, the saying, too many cooks spoil the soup. So it was a saying that there was not, quote unquote, foreign interference, as in, for example, the case of Syria, where there are so many foreign interferences that led to the deteriorating and horrible humanitarian, political, and social situation that was described as one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern history in Syria. So to my knowledge, really, I did not see evidence in the case of Tunisia. But really, we have to also think about internal factors, right? What are the internal factors in each and every country, including Tunisia, that may have led to the rebirth of authoritarianism or the reassertion and readaptation of authoritarianism in the ways we have witnessed? I think we need to pay more attention and more focus to this point. One other thing I wanted to quickly say about one of the other presentations, if I may, like when you were talking about, I believe it was your colleague in the presentation, that there were some discussions or talks among the people in the souk, in the market in Tunisia, like, oh, we are looking back again at the days of Ben Ali, as they were better days in terms of the economy and all of that stuff. Unfortunately, you also see some of that in Egypt, where people are like, oh, we wonder, it was really much better under Mubarak. Oh, we hope to go back again to the days of Mubarak. And that is a serious tendency, right? Because as Dr. Masmoudi rightly said, right, supposedly once you taste democracy, you're supposed to be longing for more democracy. Once you taste freedom, you should be longing for more freedom. But in order to see now the backlashes politically, socially, economically in some of the so-called post-Arab Spring countries, and then to see people saying, oh, we want to go back again to the days of Ben Ali or the days of Mubarak, or even non-post-Arab Spring countries like Iraq. Oh, the days of Saddam are much better than what is happening now in Iraq. So that needs a further discussion. I mean, we don't have enough time for that, but that's a serious tendency, because we want to see a much hopeful future where people really cherish democracy against all odds and does not really look back and say, oh, the days of a dictatorship were much better. Thank you.
Thank you, but I want to add something. Look, foreign interference is a fact. There is no country that lives in isolation from what's happening in the region or in the world. And whether we like it or not, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, but it's a fact. There is always foreign interference from many countries. They all try to interfere. Even in Tunisia, I was there, and they were all trying to interfere. Some, I think, were trying to help. Many were trying to make the democratic transition fail. And as proof of that interference, I just want to mention one example, one simple example. Within 7 days after the coup of CSID, 25th of July, within 1 week, 5 prime ministers from 5 governments came to Tunisia. It never happened before. Never happened that we have 5 foreign ministers, sometimes the entire government, like 5, 6, 7 ministers came. Each day there was one from each government. And guess who the 5 governments were? Egypt was number 1. Saudi Arabia was number 2. UAE was number 3. Bahrain was number 4. And Jordan was number 5. These 5 countries were within Tunisia, meeting with CSID, right after the coup happened, within 5 days. So I think there was interference. There is interference. Whether we like it or not, it's a fact of life. The only way to defeat interference is to have a strong unity within the country. Malik bin Nabi wrote about al-qabiliyya lil-istimar. If you are weak within the country, then other countries are going to take advantage of that weakness, whether you like it or not. The only way to stop it is by having a united front, Tunisian front or domestic front, that pushes against this foreign interference.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
Also, like the interference in the particular case of Tunisia, they asked explicitly to CSID to put certain political parties or politicians in prison.
Sure.
I mean, they're representatives of certain Gulf countries, one I can think of. And actually, it's interesting that CSID didn't do so 1 year after.
Because he couldn't, not because...
I mean, I don't know if he could or couldn't, but I know he refused to the face of... I heard this from very reliable sources that Tunisian officials at the time refused in their conversations with certain representatives from Gulf countries to jail certain political figures that they thought should be jailed, but then decided to do so 1 year after.
But he jailed them now, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He jailed them now.
And by the way, this isn't only with CSID.
What I'm saying is that foreign interference doesn't necessarily always work in a very direct way, but it of course matters.
Sipsi, the president between 2014 and 2019, announced publicly on TV that UAE offered him $5 billion a year for 5 years. He announced this publicly on TV with a journalist. If he can ban Ennahda. It was very clear, and he announced it not after the coup in 2019, in 2014. So this was very clear, and he announced it, and everybody knew it. Everybody has heard about it. UAE made it a condition. We'll give you $5 billion a year for 5 years, which Tunisia desperately needed at the time. But to the credit of Sipsi, he refused. Sipsi said, no, I'm not going to destroy my country and our new democracy, even for the sake of $25 billion. I prefer to save my country and to protect our democracy. But this is what he was offered back in 2014.
Well, and just to add, I think when we talk about foreign involvement, we have to look not only at sins of commission, but sins of omission. But one of my critiques is particularly the Obama administration talked a lot about Tunisia as a model democracy. I would have thought that more financial support for Tunisia would have been concomitant upon that description. And so in that regard, I think that the Western states that talked a lot about democracy promotion and said lots of nice things about Tunisia should have backed that up with additional financial support at a time when Tunisia desperately needed it.
Absolutely. Yes, please,
yes.
Lily.
Yeah, my question is to Doctors
Yasoon
and Mutlu. With regard to the relationship between authoritarian successor parties and strong state democratization, perhaps it might be an idea, and I don't know if you've done this, to look further than the region, because that has successfully happened in Northeast Asia. Strong state democratization with regard to authoritarian successor parties such as the KMT Korean parties that were ready for the next step, but the conditions were right there. Have you looked into this? And in my understanding of Tunisia is they don't have those conditions that allowed the Northeast Asian states of South Korea and Taiwan to go the step further. Thank you.
I'll say one thing, and then I'll pass it to Salih. There is a marvelous book by Daniel Ziblatt called Conservative Parties and Birth of Democracy in Western Europe, where he discusses how the conservative elites, the aristocrats in Europe, basically formed parties and agreed to democracy. And that's, I think, could have happened in Tunisia too, because Tunisia did have a strong party, but it didn't work for other reasons, not because there is not conservative elites.
So a lot of literature actually builds upon countries like Indonesia, South Korea, and we did not collect primarily data on these countries, but we challenge that literature in a sense that it emphasizes strong parties under authoritarian rule leads to strong party on institutionalization under democratic rule, but we emphasize that authoritarian successor parties is the key here. And in some contexts, such as Tunisia, where RCD was banned and networks could not be formed, then clientele ties could not be established, you don't have that advantage anymore. So it's not just, in other words, the relationship is not just straight. You need a linkage of strong authoritarian successor parties that respect the rules of the game. I think we talked about Bejikayde Sipsi. One thing about him, he respected the rules of the game, which I think separates him from other actors, such as Abir Musi, who did not necessarily respect the rules of the game afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. No more questions. So we have a 10-minute break for coffee, 10 minutes, and then we resume at 3 o'clock for the final panel between 3 and 4:30. Thank you.